Hey, Alex, it's Wade. Just waiting on Brian to join us.
Hi, welcome to our Twitter space. My name is Brian Dwerkor. I'm the editor-in-chief at Outland. I'm joining from London, which is unusual for me because I live in New York, but I'm here for a presentation we had last night of our next commission by Leo Villarreal. So um, thanks to anyone joining who came by yesterday. But today's space is about Alex Maricini's review of Toccata by Marcelo Soria Rodriguez and Andreas Rao. It is a generative audiovisual Rodriguez and Andreas Rao. It is a generative audiovisual piece, a Gesamtkunstwerk, as Alex argues in her review. And this space is part of a series we call Open Thread, where we revisit recently published reviews, invite the author and the artists to talk about them further, and bring in some other experts to join us and share their perspectives and just sort of like continue the conversation, so we can like think of criticism not as a sort of authoritative final statement, but part of an ongoing discussion. And today, besides Alex and the artists who I already mentioned, we have Def Beef and Mackenzie Davenport, who are going to talk about other works of audiovisual generative art. So I wanted to start just by hearing from the artists, Marcelo and Andreas. So generative art, as it has sort of been, I guess, redefined or brought to wider attention over the last year, is really thought of as a kind of static visual medium. There are these algorithms generate outputs that are presented and traded as static visual medium. There are these algorithms generate outputs that are presented and traded as still images. But of course, generative art has been made in lots of different mediums. And so I'm kind of just wanted to ask like how you came to this concept. I mean, both of you have done previous generative art projects that were geometric abstractions. So what sort of brought about this collaboration, and how did you turn to music?
Well, hello everyone. My name is Marcelo, and thanks for having us here today. So I don't know. It's probably a lot of things that went into this, but probably just as a short initial answer, and then I'll so that also Andreas can chip in soon. Um, I guess it was very clear right from the start that we wanted to make something with music, and with music and with the concept of decay somehow. And I guess if you want to make something with music, then it needs to be, I mean, if you want music to develop over time, then it needs to be an animated piece, or a piece that takes place in time at least, which is, well, what it became. If you want music to develop over time, then it needs to be an animated piece, or a piece that takes place in time at least, which is, well, what it became. The visuals, maybe they came from a different angle and they were not so clear from the beginning, but music was there right at the start. I guess we both have a wide interest, deep interest in music, and it means a lot to us, and it means a lot when we make an art. In my case, at least, I mean, I can speak for Andres, but in my case, I am not very much music skillful, if you would, but somehow music touches me more deeply than any other thing. So to me, it was kind of important to try and make some meaningful work with music as a material. and that, to me, that was kind of one of the starting points of this. But Andreas, please.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
interesting. Thinking about music as the or the reason for the animation, because often we think of the soundtrack as something that is added to a work after, but in this case, it came first. And how, like, what is the relationship between the visuals and the music in this piece? Is there like how would you kind of define the relationship that you were trying to create between the two?
Well, when we kind of started creating, and when we first started talking
Andreas,
about
would you
this
like to speak?
collaboration.
Marcelo is muted. He was also kind of cutting out for me a bit.
All right.
I'm not sure if it's just my connection or his.
I can hear Andreas very well.
That's very good.
Okay, I
Nice.
can't hear Andreas. I'm sorry.
Okay, can everyone
I
else
can hear him.
hear me? Okay, well, that's good. Then I'm just going to continue as before, and maybe you can reconnect to something. Okay, lovely. So yeah, coming back to the question, the kind of the connection between the visuals and the music, as Marcelo was pointing out, is this collaboration started in many ways with the music. So both of us wanted to create a musical piece, and both of us wanted to incorporate music into our generative art practice. And then very quickly we started talking about how this might connect to some visual element in it, because as you say, both of us have created visual pieces before, and basically have been into like geometric abstractions, as you said. But the question for us was, how can we create an artwork that is music and has a relationship to the visuals without being just like a music video, if that makes sense, a music visualization. So we wanted to create a connection between the two, but we wanted to have it remain rather loose in a sense, so that the visuals kind of can live their own life, and the music can live its own life, but the two obviously have relation. So we wanted to create a clue, but we wanted to have it remain rather loose in a sense, so that the visual life and the music can live its own life, but the two obviously have something in common and have some elements that they share, and some elements in the progression over time, basically, that the two share. And this is basically where we started to talk about visual concepts as well. Since well, yeah, it was the music that was first, and it was this particular piece by Sergei Prokofiev, the toccata in D minor, the toccata in D minor, that we were talking about rather quickly in the beginning, and then we started well, trying to think about, okay, this topic of decay that was interesting to both of us at the time. Since, I mean, you know, the Ukraine war had just broken out, and so we started to talk a lot about this uncertainty and these things that just like deteriorate over time, and we're thinking that this might be the element that both the music and the visuals share. Is there anything you want to add, Marcelo?
No, that's totally correct.
But yeah, then also about the like how the collaboration started out. What you were asking before, it's as Marcelo said, it's like we both have this interest for music and this
All right.
deep.
Thanks for that, Andreas. Unfortunately, I having some kind of technical difficulties. I can't hear you for some reason, but I hope the rest of the participants can, and the listeners could. Alex, I just wanted to hear from you about how you came across this work. What sort of made you realize it was a significant piece that attracted you to writing about it?
Well, Marcelo and Andres are quite well known in the generative art community on Tezos and on FX Hash for their previous work. and I had admired their previous work. And when I saw that they were doing a collaboration, I follow a lot of the FX Hash artists on Twitter, but honestly, I enjoy browsing FX Hash. I do it, I enjoy browsing FX Hash. I do it, sort of semi-casually. And when I saw the work, I was really struck by it. I mean, most of the time when I sort of discover something, it's not through, intentionally looking for new art to critique or to write about. I'm just, looking to be struck by art for my own ends, right? And FX Hash is, sort of, it's curation agnostic, which means, there's no floor, right? Sometimes crazy things can get uploaded that are not of the quality that you would expect of, say, an art blocksmith, but sometimes it means that people will experiment and take bigger risks. So I find FX Hash to be, for me, the home of a lot of really interesting, risky work in generative art. And I don't know if Brian could hear me finish that sentence, but I will go. And I know one of the things he wanted to address was the choice of blockchain. And for me, it was really down to a choice of platform. I know Andreas and Marcelo can probably speak to this, but a lot of artists pick FX Hash for the community and the sort of reception. And I know there's the collaboration feature. I don't know if either of you have minted on ETH like specifically, but if you would like to speak to whether chain choice has any effect on your work, I mean, I would imagine that this was a piece conceived for FX Hash.
Well, yes. So the chain choice. I mean, in that case, it was kind of a very obvious choice, since it was a collaboration that started out as like within the context of FX Hash. So it was the release of the like the version 1 of FX Hash, basically, that where the FX Hash team approached both Marcelo and me, asking for a potential collaboration, and among many other artists, obviously. So you've seen all these different collabs that are coming up, and so this is where this collaboration started. So it was quite kind of obvious to release it on FX Hash and on Tezos with that. I have personally not released any works on Ethereum yet. I took like a year personally not released any works on Ethereum yet. I took like a year and a half back when I started minting my first piece on the Tezos blockchain. I kind of took a very active choice in choosing Tezos for for the reasons of energy efficiency, and I was like actively looking for a chain that would do that. And then I was really struck by the community on Tezos, and later last year, the community of FX Hash, and how this just like gave a very much a feeling of creating something not only for a big void, but something for an audience, and that was really interesting to me at the time. Marcelo has released a couple of pieces on ETH. Maybe you can talk a bit more about your choices of blockchain, Marcelo.
Yeah, sure. When I started minting early 2021, I was trying to first of all understand what all these NFTs were about, because there was so much noise around them. It was kind of difficult to really understand what was the meat of it, let's say, or what was the most interesting part in this whole world for me. But maybe, I mean, I didn't even know that the Tezos blockchain existed actually by January 2021. So my first minting experience was actually on the OpenSea contract under an ERC 1155 token, which I was starting to read about the energy issues with Ethereum. And well, I thought, okay, this token seems to be that would have less of an impact in the way that OpenSea did things back then, or at least that's what I understood. So I minted 2 or 3 things there. But then I came to know about the Tethos blockchain, and more specifically about Hic-et-Nunc, through a tweet by Mario Klingemann. And well, when OpenSea did things back then, or at least that's what I understood. So I minted 2 or 3 things there. But then I came to know about the Tethos blockchain, and more specifically about Hic-et-Nunc, through a tweet by Mario Klingemann. And well, when I just started researching that and stayed there, let's say for most of the time, I stayed there for many reasons. I stayed there for the environmental reasons. I stayed there. I mean, once I read this post by Memo Acten about all the energy consumption and everything, I was truly a little bit shocked. And I was thinking, how can I do with this? But then with the Tesla blockchain, it was kind of, I mean, not solved, but it was so much better. But then what was really also important for me was like Andrea said, the feel of we are onto something on the Tethos blockchain, because the art was diverse yet interesting. And well, back in the day, I went into OpenSea and I saw a lot of different things, so some diversity, let's say, but I was not so much interested in those things, in the things that were posted there. But I could just browse the feed on Hic-et-Nunc for a long time, and it felt like refreshing, invigorating, interesting. It felt like a lot of things. So it had some certain underground vibe to it, which also appealed to me quite much. So I started minting there, and it really felt, I don't know, like the start of something very special. And to me, it was the start of something very special indeed. And then after that, whenever Hic-et-Nunc disappeared, very short time after, FX Hash appeared, and I don't know, I minted not one of the very first projects. My first project there was project number 65. Whenever Hic-et-Nunc disappeared, very short time after, FX Hash appeared, and I don't know, I minted not one of the very first projects. My first project there was project number 65 in the platform, but it kind of carried on this same vibe of all those things that I mentioned, and it was kind of probably the closest to those early days of Hic-et-Nunc that I could experience, and I really loved it. So I stayed also there. I did mint a project on art blocks because I had applied for art blocks back in July or something like that, when there was no generative art platform on Tethos. And well, they approved me as a curated release by the end of the year, by the end of 2021. And I decided to go on with it, even though FXHash already existed by that time. I decided to do it because to me it was kind of important also to, let's say, see if I would be, I don't know how to say this, see if I would be like up to the challenge of releasing a curated project on our blocks, because it to me it also had like this special flair of well, curation in the end, quality, I don't know how to say it, but external approval. It's a mark of appreciation by an external agent, which to me was important, let's say. So I decided to mint there that. But then for the rest of my works, most of them, I mean, except one little thing that I also minted on Ethereum because it was for an exhibition that was fully Ethereum based, and let's say, so I decided to mint there that. But then for the rest of my works, most of them, I mean, except one little thing that I also minted on Ethereum because it was for an exhibition that was fully Ethereum based, and well, I wanted to contribute there. I've been minting on the Tethos blockchain because I still feel like the art community and its probably its I don't know how to express this correctly, but its intellectual depth somehow is more interesting or is more appealing to me. I see less PFP projects on Tezos, and those that I see maybe a bit more interesting than on Ethereum. On Ethereum, it's like the wild far west, and regarding the art, I find it so much more appealing on the Tezos blockchain.
I don't know if Brian is still out of commission, but I think here might be a good time to bring in Def Beef because he does really innovative work on the Ethereum blockchain that often uses the mechanics of the Ethereum.
Thanks for that. And just a note, I am still having some audio issues, and I'm not really sure what happened. I left and rejoined, but Wade or Alex, if there is some dead air, feel free to step in. But yeah, Alex, I mean, I think you bring the choice of chain into your review in a really interesting way. You're talking about how, especially in a work like Takata that is thinking about history and thinking about the future, it is in a way engaging with this promise of permanence that comes with the blockchain, and thinking about putting work there involves some degree of faith that this distributed database is going to survive in the long term, right? So that's certainly something to think about, and I hope we can discuss that a bit more later. But I also just wanted to talk to Def Beef, who, as I mentioned, is another artist who makes audiovisual generative art, but it's somewhat different. As I understand, you use the same variables to generate sound and imagery, so they're kind of linked. It's very, very tight code. But when I was reading about Takata and looking at it, I thought of Entropy, which is a piece of yours that also uses synthetic aging effects and is engaging with this dynamic of immediacy and permanence that happens with generative art and the blockchain. So I was hoping you could talk a bit about what sort of drew you to that topic, and how that work came about, and maybe if you'd like share some thoughts on Takata as well.
Thank you for having me. Can everybody hear me? Is my mic working?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I guess when I started in this practice, like before NFTs, basically writing low-level code to synthesize sound and in animation. The motivation for it was in large part from watching music communities who were using very expensive or vintage hardware, like modular synthesizers, to try to achieve like a holy grail, quote unquote, of sounds, or a retro nostalgia, or something that references an earlier time period in media. And so the beginning of that practice was really a reaction in part to that consumerism and sort of the fetish for something perceived as authentic. I wanted to show that by investing it rather in knowledge and using some very cheap, simple tools like a laptop to manipulate numbers and information to try to achieve like a holy grail, quote unquote, of sounds, or a retro nostalgia, or something that references an earlier time period in media. And so the beginning of that practice was really a reaction in part to that consumerism and sort of the fetish for something perceived as authentic. I wanted to show that by investing it rather in knowledge and using some very cheap, simple tools like a laptop to manipulate numbers and information, you could still richly explore very similar perceptual effects and also others, and sort of dispense with the belief that there's something mystical or magical about, in this case, vintage hardware, so that there's no ghost in the machine, there's no aura, there's only our own associations and perception, and that can be manipulated by processing and information. And so this ties in a bit with, I have an artwork titled Entropy. So getting to that, when I became aware of generative art NFT scene on Ethereum around February of 2021, I noticed that there was an existing culture that placed a strong value, and I would say a fetish, on the idea of permanence, which makes sense because you want your money to be secure, right? But that kind of went over into NFTs and digital collectibles. As we know, NFTs point often to off-chain media files that exist somewhere else, and so people were like, "Oh my God, what is the NFT, and where does my media file live?" And it could disappear at any moment. So there was this narrative that if you could store the media file or the computer program, like on ArtBlacks, like the computer program, the script that generates it directly on the chain, then that would be sufficient to preserve it. And so, quote unquote, on chain, there's this term. And if your NFTs are on chain, then it affects its value. It affects its monetary value. And I found that really fascinating and wanted to explore that in this work. So entropy is an audiovisual generative artwork, and the system of instructions that generate the artwork are stored permanently, quote unquote, on chain, guaranteeing its existence, and yet also implementing its destruction, because every time that the token is transferred, those instructions will implement an artificial system of degradation that cause the work to degrade. In a similar will implement an artificial system of degradation that cause the work to degrade in a similar manner to the generation loss that occurs when you repeatedly copy analog media. So I think the important thing to note, most important thing to note about entropy is that the process is artificial, because there's no information that's actually lost. The code model is stored publicly and mutably on a decentralized network, and so you could reconstruct the output media in any state, and yet people still value different tokens differently depending on how many times they've been transferred. And all that is a single number that's stored in a smart contract. It's been transferred twice. It's been transferred 3 times. It doesn't affect really like its actual practical utility of being able to reconstruct the media. So you have this social construction or this destruction of value despite its artifice, right? That it doesn't actually degrade. And so yeah, that's entropy. So about Takata, I think Takata is beautiful. So about Takata, I think Takata is beautiful. And I think that like I really enjoy hearing from Andreas and Marcelo about love for time-based media, and that there like generative art has sort of been pigeonholed into static images, things that resemble paintings, and there's so much richness to discover in processes in time-based media that it's wonderful to have a great example of that explores all these things and has conceptual parts to it. And so yeah, it's a beautiful artwork.
I think we're having some dead time issues with Brian, so I'll step in again. Mackenzie, I know you have thoughts on time-based media and generative art from your video critiques, and I wondered if you wanted to step in here.
Yeah, certainly. So I in one of the videos I did on Deathbeast's work, I talked a bit about this idea of musica universalis, like the music of the spheres. And I know there's a number of ways that it could actually apply to Chicago, and I'd be interested to see if there's any additional connections there. But to give a brief overview of what music of the spheres is, it's basically this idea building on this connection between music and mathematics, which I think applies in these two works because, of course, programming is descended from mathematics and connected to mathematics in so many different ways. And it derives from Pythagoras, who basically discovered that music and different notes come from different ratios. And then it sort of evolved as other philosophers and mathematicians built on it over the years into this idea that, there is music in the world around us, but also music in the movement of the planets, music in the movement of the planets, even if we can't actually hear it, which I think applies to Kakada in a number of ways. And Deathbeast actually, he sort of dealt with this more directly in his other series called Advection. But I think you can also see it in the work of John Cage, which I know Takada gives a bit of a nod to. So I'd like to hear about that a bit too, from Andreas and Marcelo, if you have any sort of thoughts on how Cage's work, but also this idea of music of the spheres, connection of music and mathematics, works into Kakada more specifically. I have my own ideas, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Marcelo, do you want to start on this?
Okay. So, well, I do agree that there is maybe some relationship between this music of the spheres and the concept that you mentioned, Toccata, even though, let's say, in our case, like Andreas said before, the visuals and the music do have some kind of relationship that is not directly, let's say, it's not causal. So there is no causality between one thing and the other. It's not the visuals are like this because the music is like this, or the music is like this because the visuals are in this way. But the visuals, since we chose this kind of paradigm of this kind of small weird world made of kind of I don't know, cells, if you would call them somehow, that each have a hole in them, and then they rotate and they do these things. It's like they are some kind of I mean, no, like instruments from another dimension somehow. Musical instruments have this kind of small weird world made of kind of I don't know, cells, if you would call them somehow, that each have a hole in them, and then they rotate and they do these things. It's like they are some kind of I mean, no, like instruments from another dimension somehow. Musical instruments have these. Of course, mathematical relationships, like you mentioned, because the different ratios between, for example, where you press a string, and the vibrating parts of a string would then give you a given note or another note. These visuals that we came up with kind of suggest that there is also some relationship, because then they are rotating, and then there are these cells, like I mentioned, which could be like somehow time partitions or space-time partitions that then could be somehow interpreted as a musical score or something like that. But again, all these are to me, they are things that the visuals evoke somehow, but they don't have a direct relationship, like I was mentioning, to the actual soundtrack. The actual soundtrack was, I mean, is or well, I should not say soundtrack, because I don't want it. We don't regard it as the soundtrack of the piece. It's the sound part of the piece, but I wouldn't call it soundtrack again. So the sound is a generative system that is decoupled from the visuals. The only coupling point is actually the cameras. When the cameras change, they change because the music is changing, and it kind of gives some kind of synchronization between both worlds. And then there is also some kind of curation that we did, where we tried that the visuals that were a little bit more messy or more, I don't know, vibrant or something like that, would go with musical pieces that would show similar characteristics, but they are not tied in SE, or I don't know, vibrant or something like that, would go with musical pieces that would show similar characteristics, but they are not tied in any way. Um, um, I do find very interesting this relationship, however, of these pieces. I mean, if one would have like a, a big mouth to blow on those cylinders full of holes, then maybe they would make some kind of music or some kind of sound, celestial, from another dimension. I don't know, but it's not exactly what we did there. But yeah, to me it has that kind of relationship. John Cage is well, he's such a big name, let's say, in the music movement in the 20th century, and he experimented very much with a lot of concepts, with generative concepts almost, and with making music with minimal parts, which is basically what we are doing with both the visuals and the music. Because the visuals, again, even they don't have a direct relationship to music, they do use minimal elements, and then they recombine them in ways that you could do the same with music. So that was kind of, let's say, if not a very direct inspiration for either the visuals or the music, at least in my case. It was like I mean, we set that edition number clearly as some kind of tribute to the importance of his figure in the whole movement of music that kind of influenced the whole work. But I don't know if I made a lot of sense. Probably Andreas can tidy up things a bit better.
I'd like to hear. Oh, sorry, Andres. I was just gonna ask because all three artists have questions about permanence and length and sort of the way the pieces are eternal and they degrade in cycles, or in Dat Beef's case, they degrade via each transfer of the token. Often people talk about NFTs, Dat Beef's case, they degrade via each transfer of the token. Often people talk about NFTs as Dat Beef has raised with the rhetoric of permanence and the rhetoric of forever, right? But that's in fact, as Regina Harsani has written, and among other people, really dependent on, you know, pinning services and the chain continuing to be maintained and that kind of thing. So how do you feel about, and I would like to start with Dat Beef here, the sort of contingency of permanence given blockchain technology, which is relatively in its infancy, and how does that impact your work?
How does it impact my work? Well, like I think that
it's a little obvious.
Yeah, like I mean, I think that entropy works best on Ethereum because of the culture of like permanence, and because, you know, the rhetoric about it being, I mean, maybe in some ways, like there is sort of more of a guarantee that Ethereum will last a bit longer because there are, you know, there are billions of dollars of financial assets that are tied up with that. And so, you know, the generative art sort of piggybacking along with that to have a guarantee of permanence is kind of interesting. But yes, like, I mean, storing code on a blockchain is I mean, it's kind of a superficial permanence. Like, do you know if that code is going to run in the future? I feel pretty like there's a pretty good guarantee that the Ethereum network will still be around for quite a while, like decades, right? But I feel less certain that say, you know, client-side JavaScript is going to work right out of the box, right? Like in so ever many years. Not that it can't be, you know, you need someone to take care of it, basically, right? You need someone to be a steward of that, and, you know, maintain some type of, you know, documentation or whatever, or just kind of care in order to have it continue. Because on whatever scale of time, 10 years, 100 years, 200 years, I mean, like, things will have changed so drastically that it will have to change along with it.
When I was writing this article, there were some issues around the Tezos Foundation's governance, and there were some disputes.
200 years, I mean, like, things will have changed so drastically that it will have to change along with it.
When I was writing this article, there were some issues around the Tezos Foundation's governance, and there were some disputes about the curatorial practices of their foundation. And I have not seen the Ethereum Foundation specifically invest in art mechanisms in any way. I feel free to correct me here, but does anyone have an opinion about how curation and governance impact the production of work? And maybe we'll start with Andreas, because you were supposed to talk the last time.
Well, I'm not so sure about these kind of issues of curation on Ethereum specifically.
I meant Tezos, because like when I wrote the piece, people were talking about what works had been acquired for the Tezos collection a lot, and there was a lot of discussion.
I mean, it's well, curation always is kind of a what should I say? Like, it's a personal assumption of a significance of certain pieces, right? So it is always gonna be difficult to do some curation that fits everyone. But kind of one of the interesting parts of the Tezos blockchain is all this rhetorics about like a decentralized chain and a truly well, almost like democratic movement that people bring up all the time. And so what I'm wondering about is if there would be an opening for curation to also be more of a, well, say democratic kind of thing. This is, I guess, a bit of what FX Hash is trying to achieve by, well, basically not having curation, letting everyone participate and have things kind of naturally be in what FX Hash is trying to achieve by, well, basically not having curation, letting everyone participate and have things kind of naturally be in like getting traction. And then you can, of course, ask questions if that is a better measure than curation by someone who like cares and learns about the artwork and also knows a bit of art history, or if that is just pure market mechanics at play. I don't know. I find it difficult to give an answer to this.
If I could chip in here, I think that curation needs time, and I can understand that the Tezos Foundation wanted to create a permanent collection because in the end, art is the largest use case for the chain, and I think it's very nice actually that it's the largest use case for the chain because it's somehow going back to the point that we were talking about at the beginning. Somehow there is something special, widespread, let's say, in the culture of this use case around how we approach art and how we embrace art and how we have these kind of democratic values that Andreas was talking about. We have these kind of democratic values that Andreas was talking about. This not just democratic, but well, all the qualities about inclusiveness and reach, and I don't know. There's a lot of things there, but the things I can understand that the Tezos Foundation wanted to curate a collection. I was a bit surprised about how everyone was paying so much, giving so much importance to whatever the foundation did, because we humans tend to rush, and we tend to rush even more so in recent times. And we kind of need to immediately apply a label to something. This is important. This is curated. This is the things that should remain. But it makes no sense to rush so much in a world that evolves at the pace that this one evolves, with human minds that have not evolved in the same way as technology has. I mean, our reaction to the environment cannot follow the same pace of technology. It's impossible biologically. And we do need a little bit more time to let things rest and to then understand what made actually an impact, what actually made a difference, what actually meant something for those who were around it, or what changed the course of things. To name some possible criteria that one might apply. And around to name some possible criteria that one might apply. Andreas is totally right that curation is in the end a very personal affair, and no matter how you do it, I mean, okay, maybe you can have teams of curators and so on, but then there will be always lots of personal things to take into account. But time actually does a more impersonal job at, let's say, giving importance to things. And again, that importance is not necessarily for everyone either. So I don't know. In my opinion, this Web3 world allows us to free ourselves from the needs of having a necessarily, let's say, like a what's the word, a reference for what's important. Maybe we can just decide what's important on ourselves. Now, the human being has a lot of trouble with responsibility, with self-responsibility, and with freedom, because freedom brings that self-responsibility, and we prefer to just say, "Oh, I'm going to look into what others are saying that it's important," and then prefer to just say, "Oh, I'm going to look into what others are saying that it's important," and then I will just try to live with that. We have the chance now to decide on our own. So I think that's that I don't know. I would try to build things that have more to do with this other part, which maybe is also related to what Andreas is saying, that maybe FX Hash is doing some respect of just letting everyone build and then seeing what happens. And there are other things that maybe are not. We're also being driven too much in the short term by market forces. Well, but we always, I believe we need to take a step back and understand that market forces are very short term again, and we will not know what is really important until maybe it's really important until maybe some years ahead. And I just want to finish this comment by saying that I am very much aware that I said earlier that for me the curated seal of art blocks was important. To me, it was important because I was not an artist before, let's say full time, and I had a lot of trouble calling myself an artist, and somehow this kind of gave me a little bit of support, let's say, in my personal career towards myself. But having said that, I don't think that we have to place too much importance on like collective measures of importance, or rather we have to place more importance in the collective that emerges, and not only in the collective that comes from a very select group of people.
Okay, so at this point, I think a lot of the audience have been waiting very patiently, and I can see there are some really interesting voices I know in the audience. So Wade, I don't have the authority to do this, but if someone raises their hand, could you elevate them to a speaker? Does anyone have any questions either for the artists or about the general sort of discussion?
It might be cheating, but I have one. So if I can cut the line, I'll ask you real quick here. I'd be interested to hear about the rate at which both of the pieces. So if I can cut the line, I'll ask you real quick here. I'd be interested to hear about the rate at which both of the pieces degrade, and sort of how the mechanics for that were thought of from both of the artists. So entropy degrades based on transfers, and then Takata degrades based on time itself. Like it's tied directly to time. So I understand that. I'd be interested to hear like how it was decided how quickly those pieces would degrade. Of course, if I look at the Takata for tomorrow or for a month from now, it might look similar on one of those pieces, but 50 years from now, it could start looking very different. Same thing with entropy. Like if I look at it after one transfer, it could look similar, but after 100, it could be unrecognizable.
Just to cut you off here and to save time,
Yes.
the artists have a page where they explain. They have 3 different degradation speeds: days, weeks, and months. And you can also look at the pieces into the future using the browser. So I would say to look at the degradation in person, I would go to the artist page, but I will let them speak to that really quickly.
Yeah, there's not so much to add. You kind of answered the question. Though one thing I find important to point out here, and this is that Takata is, it is a piece about decay, and it's a piece about the inevitability of decay, but it's equally important to say that it's a piece about rebirth. It's a piece about cycles, like the cycles that are going on around us in life and in, I don't know, in nature and in human being, basically. So I find it tricky to just talk about like time spans of decay. It's cycles that we're talking about, and the cycles are defined as like months or weeks or days in time. And this is what I would encourage everyone to just look at, if you please. There is this little tool that we made where you indeed can kind of navigate into the future and take a little look out at what Takata will. There is this little tool that we made where you indeed can kind of navigate into the future and take a little look out at what Takata will be like, or your Takata maybe will be like, I don't know, a week from now or a month from now or something like that. So yeah, just
I checked,
go ahead and do that.
I checked 50 and 500 years from now because maybe I'm the crazy person here, but I had a lot of fun doing that. So yeah, let's go to questions now. So
yeah, hi. I'm back, and we have a question from the audience. my own participation in this space is going through cycles of decay and rebirth. So, but yeah, all right. Okay, ball is life. What do you want to?
Hey Brian.
Talk to us.
Hey Wade, Marcelo, Andreas, Alex, Def Beef McKenzie.
This life. What do you want to?
Hey Brian.
Talk to us.
Hey Wade, Marcelo, Andreas, Alex, Def Beef McKenzie. Everybody. I love all you guys, and this conversation is wonderful. I was just wondering if you could. So like, when I think of music, it's like a very performative way of art, and a lot of what's been talked about is in terms of time and the longevity of that, but like when I feel like I enjoy music or music based art, it's like I have a vinyl of the Def Beef series, and like I've listened to Toccata in different settings, and I was just curious if the artist could speak on like whether that was considered in the process of making it, and like how you'd like or envisioned like people to view it, because many times, like at least with NFTs and digital art based NFTs, it's just like kind of viewing on a screen. And yeah, I was just curious if you could go into the experience you were envisioning and that.
Maybe we should have Def Beef explain the vinyl situation here, because that's really cool and unique.
Oh, sure. Thank you for the question. So the generative audio from some of the series that I released, we put it together. Some of these pieces have been sort of co-curated by community members. Some of the series you can kind of change it around by turning knobs and get different audio music out of your generative tokens. So we put that together and released a vinyl record. For fun as a collectible, but also as, you know, a further way to preserve the information that started as, you know, digital. And in case Ethereum goes away, at least it will be sitting in someone's basement, which may last a lot longer, right? Maybe that will be around for longer. Anyway, so that's the vinyl record. Speaking to about the way that I intended for people to one's basement, which may last a lot longer, right? Maybe that will be around for longer. Anyway, so that's the vinyl record. Speaking to about the way that I intended for people to experience the work. To be quite honest, like when I started this practice, my audience was social media, right? So I made my videos to be 1 minute long, and I only started adding visuals to them. I started making generative music by added visuals to them, because that's the only way that you could distribute your work, say on Instagram or on you can't just post an audio file. You can't do it, or at least it'll get ignored. And so for what it is, that was sort of the intended way that I did it. Now in the future, like, you know, maybe I'll consider other things now that I have resources, and maybe there's opportunity to do things that are meant to be experienced, you know, in some type of some other type of format in person. But to be quite honest, the pieces some other type of format in person. But to be quite honest, the pieces that I've made have been heavily influenced by the environment that I happen to find myself in. So there you go.
Yeah, maybe I can speak a bit about Toccata, kind of to that same questions. Thank you for the question, by the way. I find it really interesting that you bring up this aspect of like performance that always comes with music, obviously. And I find it really interesting to actually think of Toccata as a performative piece. I like to view it as a performance without a performer, if that makes sense. So there's the piece is finished in that sense that it's minted on the blockchain, but it still evolves over time, and it still is always just a window of the time that you can look at basically when you open the piece in your browser. So to me, like I'm a jazz musician myself, and to me Toccata is very much about this kind of same spirit of music happening in time, happening kind of improvised music. Basically, this is what Toccata is about. It's a performance they can look into at all times. You can kind of open the door and peek into the concert hall and just like look into what's happening here and now, and it might never be the same again. And this is what I find really interesting, and this also kind of speaks to maybe the way that at least I think of Toccata should be viewed like. So what I'm thinking of is actually that there could be a very physical experience. There could be a room with a decent screen, decent speakers, or maybe a projection even, so that you could walk into the room and walk out of the room again as you please, so that the piece lives on even if you're not part of it. Experience. There could be a room with a decent screen, decent speakers, or maybe a projection even, so that you could walk into the room and walk out of the room again as you please, so that the piece lives on even if you're not part of it. This I find really interesting, because it's not like it's continuing to age, and it's continuing to run all over and over and over again, and it's going through these cycles without any human intervention. And you are just invited to be part of this at the times that you want to. I find that really really poetic, actually. This is how I imagine Toccata to be viewed. Maybe Marcelo, you have some other thoughts about that?
Just a very quick note about the performance nature of it. It actually literally is a performance like with any other generative art that we know from FXH or art blocks, because actually there is a score, which is the script, and the computer executes the script. Then with still work, it just generates an image. But in this case, it is interpreting an endless score, and the performer is the computer. So it really is a performative thing. If you wrote a JavaScript engine that would work slightly different, let's say you'd say in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, I don't care when, JavaScript has a state of mood, okay? So your JavaScript today is a bit sad. Maybe it will perform Toccata in a sadder kind of way, because it will just read the score and say, oh, I will slow down the tempo today because I feel like that. And we take for granted things today because there is no other technical way of looking at them, and we say, oh, this is it's JavaScript code. Well, JavaScript code is a score for an artwork, and so far we know musical notation and other ways of encoding an artwork, and since software is one of them, I really wanted to stress underscore the score nature of the script and the performative nature of the piece. That's all I wanted to say.
I love this, but I think we should also invite more questions at this point, just because we're running out of time. As much as I could speak to how much I want to see the infinite room running the score. So if you have a question, please don't hesitate.
The score nature of the script and the performative nature of the piece. That's all I wanted to say.
I love this, but I think we should also invite more questions at this point, just because we're running out of time. As much as I could speak to how much I want to see the infinite room running the score. So if you have a question, please don't hesitate.
I was just gonna say, I think it's great. You guys are like thinking, generative art can be pigeonholed sometimes. Generative art can be pigeonholed sometimes, and the way that everybody here is conceptually thinking and executing it in terms of presently and longevity wise is fascinating. So thank you.
I mean,